evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to our fourth budget workshop. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thanks for everyone for coming out tonight. I'll turn it over to Dr. O'Malley.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. McCann. So welcome. This is our fourth and final budget workshop of the season. We do have our budget adoption scheduled for next Tuesday on the 16th. We have been hoping, typically the governor's executive budget is approved on April 1st each year. There was an extension that was given until the 8th, and now we're hearing there's another extension until the 15th, so that's the day before our adoption. So we're hoping that we do have some additional finalized information before next Tuesday. What we have been hearing in terms of conversations with legislators is that it will be somewhat conservative to assume that we're receiving the same level of aid that we received in previous years. However, the additional 3%, minimum 3% increase that was called for from the Senate and Assembly, they said would be a little presumptuous to assume that we were going to get that. So you'll see when Ms. Bellotti presents tonight that our approach has been to plan as if we're getting the same level of aid as previous years, and just that. We've applied an additional amount of our reserves, which you'll see here, and then if we are able to receive additional aid, we will talk about that prior to our adoption on Tuesday. We have relatively similar to our previous budget workshops in terms of our proposals. However, tonight is really framed, we're adding a couple new things in. We have our projected class sizes at the elementary level. See a number of our elementary staff out here, which is great. And just really an overview of the full budget process and where we go from here now that we're finishing up our fourth workshop. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Mrs. Bellotti to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. O'Malley. Good evening, everyone. So these are the latest projected average class sizes for the 2024-25 school year. Of course, we monitor these numbers very closely throughout the spring and summer, and these numbers will change based on CSE and CPSE meetings and enrollments. As Dr. Romanelli mentioned, the state budget should have been released by April 1st. However, extenders have been passed to allow more time for an agreement to be reached. And I think two of the most talked about topics this year with the executive budget proposal were the removal of the safe harmless and the inflation factor adjustment to the foundation aid formula. So these proposed changes in the executive budget would decrease our district's foundation aid by $3.4 million. Districts must adopt their budgets and submit their property tax report card by April 29th to New York State, and we are planning on adopting next week on Tuesday, April 16th. Both the Assembly and Senate have rejected all proposed cuts to foundation aid and have even proposed that districts get that 3% increase in foundation aid. But the governor continues to press for reductions in these areas, but we are hopeful, as Dr. Romanelli mentioned, based on the information we received, that we will at least get the same amount of foundation aid as we did in the prior year. So unless the state budget is released prior to our adoption, we will be using an estimated amount of state aid for foundation aid based on what we believe we will be receiving. There are three main sources of revenue for school districts. Property taxes, of course, being the primary source of revenue. That's the amount of taxes that we can levy, and that is subject to the tax cap. State aid is a second major source of revenue for districts, and it can either be formula-driven, such as a foundation aid, or expense-driven. That's just based on what you've spent, such as a BOCES aid or a transportation aid. Other local revenues are the other source of revenue for districts, and they include things such as interest income, or non-resident tuition, rental income, or a pilot payment. A pilot payment is a payment in lieu of taxes, and it's simply where a commercial property owner would enter into an agreement with the town to make annual payments for a set period of time, usually 10 years. And then we actually have one pilot payment in our town, which is the veterinary office on Sunrise Highway. This is our funding profile in West Islip, and as you can see, our primary source of funding comes from property taxes, just about 69%. We only get about 24% from state aid, about 2.8% in those other revenue, and about 3.8% of our funding profile consists of our reserves and our fund balance. In Suffolk County, the tax burden is shared by homestead and non-homestead taxpayers. And what that means, a homestead taxpayer is just a 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling, or a vacant land that is 10 acres or less. And all other properties are essentially non-homestead. That's your office space, your retail spaces, apartments, a restaurant. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, our district is primarily homestead taxpayers. We have 89% of the tax burden being paid by homestead taxpayers, and only 11% paid by non-homestead. So our profile looks a lot different than, say, a Hauppauge school district would look, because they have a very large industrial park. Since the tax cap was enacted in 2012, in order to calculate what your expenditure budget can be for the following school year, you have to first calculate your restricted tax levy, then you add in any expected state aid or other revenue you're going to receive, any appropriated fund balance, and any amount you're going to appropriate from your reserves. And that result is your expenditure budget for the following year. So just going with that formula, the very first is our restricted tax levy. Our allowable levy limit, as we went through in the very first budget workshop, is projected to increase by 1.44%, or a change in about 1.3 million for next year. That's relatively low, considering the average on Long Island right now currently is 2.67, and Suffolk County is seeing an average of 2.97. So these tax levy increases are especially challenging when the rate of inflation is 4.1%. In order to calculate the tax rate for next year, the actual tax rate, you actually need 3 different numbers. You need your tax levy, your final assessment values, and your homestead percentages. The district actually only provides one of those numbers each year, and that's the tax levy, which we know is projected to be $93.4 million for next year. So those final assessment values and those homestead percentages, they actually come from the town of Islip, but we don't receive that information until the fall of 2024. So in order to provide an estimated increase in taxes, what we do is we say the number that we do know is the tax levy, and we just use the current year's percentages and assessment values to come up with an average. So our average increase in taxes next year, based on an average assessed home in West Islip of $45,000, is an increase of $149.78. That's about $12.48 a month. We actually also provide instruction on how to calculate your own personal taxes in our district newsletter, which is distributed to all of our residents. So this slide is actually showing the current executive proposed budget. As you can see, I highlighted, I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of hard to see, but the very top number, the foundation aid, for 24-25 is currently projected to only be 22.7 million. That's a reduction of 3.4 million in foundation aid. But again, we are expecting, so this slide is the same exact numbers, but what we're expecting the foundation aid to remain flat. We're hopeful that it will remain flat. So if that happens, we will see a very slight increase in our overall aid of 1.05%, which isn't great, but it's much better than the 8% decrease. The district's other revenue sources that I spoke of are listed here. That pilot payment I mentioned at the veterinary office, they just finished a 10-year pilot, and now they're going to be beginning a new one because of work that's being done there. So that's why you see a decrease in that pilot payment. The tuition from other districts is also one of the big decreases you'll see up there for $100,000 decrease. That's primarily attributable to the fact that one of our special education students in our parentally placed schools no longer needs a one-on-one nurse. So there's a big drop off there. And our miscellaneous income is projected to decrease by approximately $60,000, and that number is really made up of summer programs, premiums on our TAN borrowings, our tax anticipation notice every year, our CPSC reimbursement, and our miscellaneous refunds. So overall, our overall our other revenue sources are looking at a decrease of approximately 4.73%. School districts are allowed to establish reserve funds as a way to save money for a future capital project or a very large equipment purchase. Reserve funds provide financial stability for districts in that they reduce your reliance to have to go out and get a bond to do a capital project or make an equipment purchase. They also provide you with budgetary option though, which is really helpful in challenging budget years. So instead of cutting programs or reducing services, you can use those reserve funds as a source of revenue. This is the list of reserve funds that our district currently has. The first one is known as EBLR. It's the Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve. It is used for the payment of accrued unused time, days, for an employee upon their retirement or separation from the district. The Retirement Contribution Reserve is used for the payment of retirement contributions from both the ERS and the TRS reserve funds. The Workers' Compensation Reserve is for the payment of compensation, benefits, medical, hospital, or any expenses that are approved by workers' compensation law. And the Unemployment Reserve is used for the reimbursement to the State Unemployment Insurance Fund for payments made to claimants. We also have 2 capital reserve funds in our district, which are used for the cost, again, of any major projects that we'd like to do or large equipment purchases. Our overall district's reserve plan is always posted on the district's website, on the business page, and it is updated twice a year. So as I mentioned, reserve funds are really great because you can use them as a source of revenue. So we're able to use them, especially in challenging budget years like this one. We are looking to use our reserve funds next year in the amount of $4,375,000. So I have listed here on the left-hand side each reserve, as well as the current balance as of the last year end, which was June 30th, 2023, and the amount we are appropriating or using as a source of revenue for the upcoming school year. We are looking to appropriate $400,000 from that EBLR reserve. $2.1 million will be appropriated from the TRS reserve. $1.5 million will be appropriated from the ERS reserve, and $375,000 will be appropriated from the Workers' Compensation Reserve. This is just a summary of that budget formula I had up at the beginning of the presentation. It's a summary of all the different budget components. As you can see, our levy is projected to increase $1.3 million, or 1.44%. Again, very low considering the percentage increases we're seeing around the island. Our state aid number there, again, it's highlighted in red because this is our assumption that we are going to see a 1% increase in state aid, assuming our foundation aid remains flat. As I mentioned, our other revenues, we are looking at a slight decrease of about 4.7%. We are appropriating from reserves a significant amount, $4.3 million, which is $3 million more than last year, so that's why that percentage is so high. And we are going to appropriate our fund balance of $850,000, that's the same as last year. So overall, our expenditure budget is increasing by $4.5 million, or that's an increase of 3.38%. So that expenditure budget next year of $138,761,990, that number is broken into 5 different categories. Our budget is broken down into instruction, undistributed, general support, transportation, and community services. The instruction budget covers all of the district's expenses that support our pre-K through 12 instruction of regular and special education students. Those are all the 2000 budget codes if you were to ever look at an appropriation status report. The undistributed budget codes relate to all of the employee benefit expenses, our debt service, our capital project funding, and our district's cost for providing a small special education program that we run over the summer. That's all of our 9,000 codes. And the general support budget consists of all the expenses that cover the district's overall management and operations, which include the Board of Education, legal, insurance, auditors, the superintendent, human resources, the business office. That's all of your 1,000 budget codes. Our transportation budget codes, of course, that supports the general and special education transportation of students in public, private, and parochial schools. And lastly, the community services are the expenses related to the use of the district's pool, the community's use of the district's pool. This is just a breakout of those categories, and as you can see, instruction-related expenses take up the most of our budget. It's over 53%. The undistributed category, that's that benefits category. That's the next biggest piece at 30%. General support is just under 12%. Transportation is just under 5%, and the community service is very tiny. Doesn't even get a color. It's just really above 0%. On our ballot for this May, the vote, you will see the school budget vote, as well as the use of capital reserves. As I mentioned, we have 2 capital reserves, and we are looking to do 2 projects next year using our capital reserve funds. We will look to begin with phase 1 of a boiler burner control replacement project that's district-wide. And at Udall Middle School, we are going to renovate the orchestra room with updates to the HVAC system, leveling out the flooring in that room, as well as adding acoustical tiles. These projects are estimated to cost $860,000, but it is important to note that any unspent funds are simply returned back to the capital reserve fund. We will be adopting, as we mentioned, on Tuesday, April 16th. And for 2024-25, we do have 2 Board of Education trustee seats open. The nominating petitions for those seats are due to district office on April 22nd. And our public budget hearing will take place on May 7th. And of course, our budget vote is May 21st in the high school gymnasium between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Does anyone have any questions?
No, I just wanted to thank you for all the work done. Just to recap, and it's our last kind of budget. We don't have the final numbers from the state yet, but if it goes the way we think it's going to go, just to put it in perspective, the budget year over year increase in our budget was 3.38% over last year's budget. And to Ms. Palotti's point, with an inflation of 4% kind of nationally, it's a great accomplishment to be able to hold that. And it does include a lot of expansion for our students. So, part of what we've gone through at these meetings is, adding a speech teacher, an E&L teacher, a grade 7 ICT at Beach Street, more vocational classes in science and education. We have increased enrollment in the elementary school level, which is great, and you can see the class sizes are in my opinion, just good all over the place. To be able to keep those sizes. Pre-K enrollment is at 264. We're offering that to everybody out there. Just a lot of great things happening in the budget in this really tough time of year. So thanks to great financial planning, working through the budget, but I don't want that to go unnoticed because other districts aren't like this. I have a family member who's on the Amityville school board. You don't want to be in Amityville right now. They're talking about closing elementary schools and laying off teachers. To the tribute, you've got districts across really scrambling for this, and because of the position that we're in and built up the last 6 years, we're not in that position and we're adding. So kudos to everyone in this room who's involved with the district, whether you're a community member, a staff member, and the administration here, and my fellow board members. It's really an accomplishment in what could have been a really tough time now the district's having. So thanks for all the work on this budget.
Thank you.
Does anyone out there have any questions, comments? Feel free to just ask them aloud. We're here. All right, so the next part of our So we're going to have our standard committee meetings, which are going to take place in the library. They're open to anyone who'd like to join us, and that's the finance policy committees in the library. We do have a special board meeting that was posted for this evening. It's really for us to go into executive session about some confidential issues. So it's really not, there's really nothing accomplished. We'll go right into executive session. But if anyone wants to join us in the library, more than welcome to. We're going to talk about, like I said, education, finance, and policy. But thanks to everyone for coming out tonight, and hopefully see you soon.